Death planes. These were a major burden for out-of-bounds explorers. Even after normal damaged planes got proper documentation, these remained a mystery. If anything touches them, they die instantly, regardless of health. However, they can now be disabled, allowing free exploration of any map. But that's just where my problems began. The date was November 2023, and I just made a massive breakthrough. For years, the modding community was perplexed by damaged planes, as in areas where there's no physical object but still cause damage. A good example is the one that prevented exploration of the jobless dev map in episode 4 of Sly 2. We knew how things like Bentley Sleep Darts or Sly's Cane worked, but not this kind of thing. The damaged sources we knew how to modify had two important parts, the amount, and the type. We didn't quite know how the amount worked yet, but we did know how the type worked. Each damage type, such as fire, voltage, drowning, getting squished and more, each had a set value in the game's memory, which was stored in a bit field. For example, the value for Murray's guard slam was hexadecimal 20,000, while the value for Sly's voltage attack was hexadecimal 800. By scanning memory for all instances of hexadecimal 800, we can one by one, replace them with a different value. When Sly's voltage attack changes to a different attack type, we've found where it's located in memory. This trial and error system is how we found damaged sources for a long while. One day, I decided to try this approach on a damaged plane, just to see if it worked the same way. My target was the water flowing out of the drain pipe in episode 4, as I'd been wanting to mod the game to allow re-entry. The issue was that I didn't know which type it used, as while it did knock any character away, there's several knockback attack types, and this trial and error method didn't end up working by looking for its type. However, a short while before this, we figured out how damage amounts work. This value here, at least with our current knowledge, contained a 2-byte value at the end, which was the amount. Strangely, it used a negative number, which is why it was so hard to figure out. After disabling the game's adaptive difficulty, I took note of how many times it took the drain pipe to kill Sly. After searching for the amount, I ended up finding it. However, when I set this value to 0, the water became solid. As I would later find out, the first 2 bytes control some kind of interaction. A value of 0 makes it solid, and a value of 1 makes it non-solid. There was unfortunately no way to make it visible, as while it was an object, it couldn't be given a texture. As damaged plane documentation continued, I decided to make a mod that disabled damaged planes to make every map more explorable. This would later evolve into the Map Mastery mod. I would later take this new knowledge into Sly 3, and with some help, eventually figured out that it worked in mostly the same way, except it stores damage amounts as positive numbers instead of negative numbers. It was then time to address the elephant in the room, death planes. Exclusive to Sly 3, these were even more mysterious than normal damaged planes, as we confirmed through the trial and error method that they don't store their attack type or amount in memory. Someone else managed to find a semi-reliable way to find death planes in memory, as well as figuring out how they worked. Imagine every level is inside a box. Everything inside the box is left untouched, but everything outside the box is instantly killed or broken. This explains why going millions of miles away from the map wasn't enough to avoid it. By making the box incredibly big, we could finally have free reign over all the maps, even if that means we couldn't make the death planes solid and walk on them, which would have been interesting to see. Sometime later, a very useful method of automation was discovered in both Sly 2 and Sly 3. As described before, in order to find a damaged plane, we'd either have to search for all instances of the damage amount or damage type, then slowly but surely narrow down the results until we find the damaged plane we want to modify. However, this new discovery was a pointer which always points to the memory region for the damaged plane that the player last touched. Want to disable this fire pit? Just get burned by it. Want to raise this water up? Just fall into it. Want to shrink the guard pursuing you? Just let it shoot you. Even more helpful is the fact that this also points to security lasers, which we had no way of searching for at the time, since the list in memory that contains all entities included lasers, but didn't list their location in memory. This would allow for the discovery and disabling of many new things, which would culminate in an update to the map mastery mod. Even better, the Sly 3 version of this pointer was capable of pointing at death planes, meaning all you had to do to find them was touch them. Additionally, I found a way to make them disappear instead of needing to make them bigger, which got around some issues in certain maps. At this point, it was safe to say that the biggest and most troublesome limiting factor in map exploration had been conquered.
Sometimes foreshadowing is relatively obvious.
It was then that I decided to start work on a second map mastery mod for Sly 3. However, due to memory differences doubling or even tripling the required work, I chose to make the mod for the September prototype, a post-release build with a debug menu. This would make the levels more explorable with the mod, while reducing the amount of work I had to do. The first map I wanted to pacify was the Lemonade Bar. While not that hazardous inside the bar, the exterior was covered with the death barrier and multiple damaged planes. The Cooper gang can be seen running into the building from the outside, so surely it was possible to disable everything and stand out there. I'd gotten done disabling every external hazard, when I decided to paraglide onto the roof, and this happened. Your reaction was probably similar to mine. Oh great, more damaged planes, I thought to myself, so I looked at the pointer to see what I needed to disable, but that's when I found something odd. Rather than pointing to the damaged plane which just shocked me, it started pointing to Sly himself. As a test, I spawned in his Bentley, and touched the same area. He got zapped, and the pointer started pointing to Bentley. Murray acted the same way. According to the game, whenever Sly, Bentley, or Murray touched this damaged plane, they weren't getting zapped by a damaged plane, but rather they were zapping themselves. I knew for a fact that this wasn't true, since there actually was a damaged plane here. I could move over it, around it, under it, and above it, meaning it had a defined shape. At the same time, the game adamantly denied there ever being a damaged plane there. I then fell back to the old trial and error method. But despite replacing all instances of shock damage with another type, this damaged plane remained unchanged, just like death planes. Seeing as how there was no way for me to find them in memory, I decided to look for more. As it turned out, all but 2 of the game's levels included them, sometimes upwards of 10 or 20, all of them making the pointer point at the character that touched the damaged plane rather than the plane itself. On screen is a select few of the ones I found. I would later discover that a handful of them used the fall damage type instead of shock, but otherwise acted the same. As a last resort, I fell back to an even more time-consuming, and way riskier, method of finding objects: float comparisons. If I moved Sly to the top of one of these planes, took note of his coordinates, moved Sly to the bottom of the plane, took note of his new coordinates, and searched for everything located in between those 2 sets of coordinates, I could find it by changing them one by one until the plane had moved to a different place. Despite this, I found everything in that area except the damaged plane. I repeated this for multiple mystery shock planes, which took weeks, and in the end I found nothing. I decided to name these mysterious planes Schrodinger's death planes, as they behaved exactly like normal death planes, but they both did, and did not exist, depending on how you looked for them. I documented them as much as I could, and shared my findings with the modding community. No one took much of an interest in them, however this was true for normal death planes until right after damaged planes got proper documentation, so it was only a matter of time before more people looked into it. Many months later, I was working on an update for the Sly 2 Map Mastery mod, and I got some help figuring out why John Bison on the train was invincible despite not really being invincible. It was discovered that every entity with player controls or artificial intelligence had 26 bytes in their region of memory, each one controls resistances to each damage type. Lots of other things could be fixed by this too, such as fixing Dimitri taking damage from sleep attacks. Sometime after this, I returned to Sly 3 Schrodinger's death planes, but still couldn't make any more progress. Suddenly, I had an amazing idea. If I could change resistances to individual damage types in Sly 2, then surely I could do it in Sly 3. If I simply make the player immune to shock damage, then the Schrodinger's death planes couldn't do anything, right? As it turns out, yes, this was true. After getting some help finding it in Sly 3, Sly was indeed immune to them. However, other modders got curious what I was talking about when I said, Schrodinger's death plane, as they had no context for this. Apparently the research I posted wasn't as visible as I'd thought, so I explained the whole thing again. After reading my documentation, they claimed that something must be wrong with my game, because nothing like this exists. In response, I gave them a few locations to visit so they could see it for themselves. They went to these locations in the American release of the game, and to my complete shock, not only are all of these areas covered by solid collision, that neither the player nor the camera want anything to do with, but these areas simply teleport the player back to a safe position. All retail copies of the game act like this, as well as all other review copies. It seems that Schrodinger's death planes are exclusive to the September prototype. At first, I thought that this build killed you instead of warped you back, however this is wrong. In this clip here, I unloaded the map in the Australian outback quarry, and teleport to one of the Schrodinger's death planes. Now when I touch that area, it warps me back just like retail copies. It seems that the developers put these Schrodinger's death planes over every warp back trigger for some unknown reason. What's even weirder is the fact that the September prototype was compiled after the American release, but before the European release. This means that Sucker Punch made this change then later removed it. Alternatively, it could have been a feature used for testing. Since this is technically a review copy, the reviewers it got sent to would probably notice dying more than getting warped away, which helped them report out-of-bounds glitches to be fixed. On the other hand, there were no bug fixes after the American release, so this could also be incorrect. There's a myriad of reasons it could be here, anywhere from leftover test code to an inside joke. You're probably expecting a resolution like the Mystery of VZ video, where we finally figure out how to isolate and modify them. However, that hasn't happened yet. No one in the modding community has taken a deep dive into how to modify individual parts of maps. Since Schrodinger's death planes seem to be modified map parts more than triggers, it's still a mystery exactly how they work. Same for the warp back triggers, which are at the same locations.